Let us begin this time by considering the words of Colonel Robert Ingersoll, circa 1896. For the most part, we inherit our opinions. We are the heirs of habits and mental customs. Our beliefs, like the fashion of our garments, depend on where we were born. We are molded and fashioned by our surroundings. Environment is a sculptor, a painter. If we had been born in Constantinople, the most of us would have said, "There is no God but Allah, and Mohammed is his prophet." If our parents had lived on the banks of the Ganges, we would have been worshippers of Shiva, longing for the heaven of Nirvana. As a rule, children love their parents, believe what they teach, and take great pride in saying that the religion of mother is good enough for them. Most people love peace. They do not like to differ with their neighbors. They like company. They are social. They enjoy traveling on the highway with the multitude. They hate to walk alone. The Scotch are Calvinists because their fathers were. The Irish are Catholics because their fathers were. The English are Episcopalians because their fathers were. And the Americans are divided in 100 sects because their fathers were. This is the general rule, to which there are many exceptions. I grew up under the dual Christian-Mormon cacophony. My mother, though the Christian, was much more pluralistic than my father, the Mormon. That is, she was much more inclined to hold the view that all religions are in some sense true. For the first several years of my life, she was a firm practitioner of tarot and New Age. One result of this, and the fact that she got custody after the divorce, was my exposure to ideas from religions cosmetically very different from Christianity. Religions whose practitioners I had noticed were just as fervent and confident about their beliefs as Christians and Mormons. Therefore, confidence among Christians and Mormons, for me, was a characteristic which was never especially differentiating or impressive. In junior high, in the course of one class or another, I would find myself learning things here and there about mythology. I read about things done in the stories of the canon by a number of Greek gods which were no less far-fetched, no less impressive, no less incredible than any of the claims in the Bible or the Book of Mormon to which I had received primary exposure. This made the claims within these books much less impressive, yet no less far-fetched by comparison. The fact that people in one area grow up with a different set of elaborate tall tales than people in another area has a way of making those tall tales much less impressive once one realizes that. A Christian woman once asked me if I had ever gone to the seminary to examine their evidence. I pointed out that by seminary, she means a Christian seminary. Why Christian specifically? I asked if she had ever gone to a Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, or Muslim seminary to examine their evidence. I have no doubt as far as my religiosity goes, this exposure to mythology and other religions was, if you'll pardon the metaphor, one of the first nails in the coffin. Why is it that people who grow up under one particular religion have the tendency to grow up to practice that one instead of some other? It is because growing up as they do under the influence of that one, they are weaned on arguments which emphasize the strengths of that one such as they are, and the weaknesses of others. The one they are raised under is typically described with the most poetic, flattering language imaginable, while the rest are either not described, or described neutrally or pejoratively. They are raised under a deliberately biased double standard of argument, which in logic is known as special pleading. During the 2000 election, I was still in regular contact with my father, a veritable Republican supremacist. One detail about Bush's past, which the Gore campaign dredged up, was an incident in which he was pulled over for drunk driving. My father argued that he was only caught because he realized that he was drunk and therefore compensated by driving excessively slowly. He was over-careful. I know enough about my father to know that there is no way in any hell that any Democrat who did the same thing would receive the same benefit of the doubt from this man. By the same token, common is the rhetoric among conservatives, "Why can't everyone just learn English?" As someone recently pointed out in the comments in one of my videos, it makes just as much sense to ask, "Why can't everyone just learn Aramaic?" In their infamous announcement, Way of the Meister cited the tendency of the schools to teach only evolution instead of the alternative. Which alternative? Why, the Judeo-Christian Islamo-Mormon creation tale, of course. Why that one in particular? Why not the Hindu creation tale? That's an alternative as well. Why not creation tales from ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, Neolithic Africa, Greece, or Norway? Why none of the abundant Native American creation tales? If this one alternative deserves consideration, then how come none of the rest of these do? How come they're not campaigning for any of these as well? Why join forces for Campus Crusade for Christ, but not also Campus Crusade for Tezcatlipoca? If that particular alternative is supported less by the evidence, then demonstrate that. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume that the problem is that it's too hard for you to pronounce. I was once presented with the argument that in order to see the profundity and superiority of the Quran, one must begin with an awareness of its internal consistency. Clearly, awareness is a euphemism for assumption. One must begin with the assumption of its internal consistency. In other words, one must begin by assuming its superiority as a book, before one can see that superiority. One must deliberately set oneself up for confirmation bias. This argument, when stripped of its poetic and vague language, says that the Quran only appears superior when one begins by assuming that it is. It appears superior through the eyes of confirmation bias and special pleading. What other books does the Muslim insist on reading in this fashion? Well, the Hadiths, of course, and probably various apologetic works, but otherwise none. The Quran appears superior in this case because it is given special treatment. This presupposition could make any book seem superior. The Muslims find the Quran superior to other books because they hold it to a lower standard than they hold other books. The Christians find the Bible superior for the same reason. The same can be said of the Hindus with regard to the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. Any book will seem superior when the standard it has to meet as a book is deliberately lowered. What about this book? This book, I can tell you from experience, is quite internally consistent, a credit to the skill of the author. Was I aware of this consistency before I began to read it? No, I couldn't have been. One cannot really be aware of the internal consistency of a book one has never read before. One can be aware of claims of the book's internal consistency, but not that consistency itself, not until one has experienced it. Recognizing its internal consistency before reading it is, however, completely unnecessary. Most people who read this particular book will recognize its internal consistency and its superiority as a book, without assuming either in advance. I am presented over and again with arguments from Muslims and Christians, with the expectation that I will find them utterly convincing. Why do they have this expectation? It is because they find these arguments utterly convincing. Of course, the only reason this is the case is that they are convinced already. They have the desire to be presented with the message that the position they are holding is the correct one. Therefore, anything which seems to suggest this is given virtually no scrutiny, while any claim that their position might be incorrect receives an amount of scrutiny no claim could hold up under. That's a double standard. That's special pleading. A vehicle's superiority is demonstrated either by its ability to do things other vehicles cannot, or by its ability to do things better than other vehicles can. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe it gets better mileage. Maybe it's able to haul more weight at greater speeds. Maybe it brakes more effectively. Maybe it handles better or more effectively protects its passengers in the event of an accident. Maybe it holds up better under the same wear. In other words, its superiority as a vehicle is demonstrated objectively in the way it does a better job of meeting the same standards. The superiority of a vehicle, if true, can be demonstrated without asking anyone to begin with the assumption that it is true.